All right. Between 1900 and 1910, the critical years in which the Porfiriato sort of destabilized, there were several factors at work. Now, number one, we want to consider the deprivation that peasants and industrial workers faced. Peasants and industrial workers faced increased food shortages, rising prices, inflation, and increased unemployment due to the financial shocks that were occurring really throughout the world at this time. And obviously that was very destabilizing. Number two is this issue of American colonists. The peasants experienced new levels of displacement as 15,000 American colonists, armed with property titles and rifles, occupied large areas of Chiapas, Chihuahua, Coahuila, Puebla, Sonora, Sinaloa, San Luis Potosi, and other places. And apart from the colonists, American corporations bought massive land tracts in the north and the south, all over the place. So this obviously was destabilizing and incensed Mexicans. Third, the frustrated Mexican pequeña burguesia and local and provincial elites saw their own social position erode and the national government politically overwhelmed by foreign economic invasion. And the federalist principles, their local autonomy, were abused by the resulting dictatorship and boss rule of Diaz. And opportunities for social and economic success increasingly were limited by erratic downturns endemic to this economy, with new foreign competitors often working in cooperation with the national government. And then finally, I mentioned in the past these foreign ideologies. In the first 10 years of the 20th century, all four classes, peasant, industrial worker, pequeña burguesia, and provincial elites, separately espoused the revolutionary doctrines of anarchism, liberalism, or democracy. But in the context of growing foreign economic, political, and cultural domination and deepening economic crisis, all four could and did rally to the concept of nationalism. Defense of national sovereignty was something they could all buy into and a key element of the revolution. Some of you wisely asked me in discussion today, was this revolutionary formula I've been talking about unique to Mexico? And the answer is no. And so I want to put it in the global context. There were several other revolutions that occurred about the same time with similar circumstances. The first was in Iran in 1905. Iran was independent, but it was dominated by foreign capital, much like Mexico. And there was a revolution against the national government, and the issues were local autonomy, constitutionalism. The revolution did not go as far as it could have because it was stopped by foreign intervention, Russians and British. Speaking of Russians, Russians and British were major investors in Iran. Russia also experienced its own revolution in 1905, not the big one, not 1917, but a precursor revolution in 1905. In 1861, Tsar Alexander had freed the serfs. Peasants were no longer bound by birth to the land they were born on. And so there was an influx of foreign capital, and agriculture was mechanized, commercialized, and this, of course, was very destabilizing, and that was the result of this revolution. And then finally, in China, we did have the big one, 1911. The Manchu dynasty is toppled, and Sun Yat-sen comes to power. Of course, he'll be set by the communists soon. In all three of these, we had old inequalities and new economic pressures in the form of foreign investment bringing modern capitalism, and the result was revolution. And so the revolution begins. The Porfiriato is destabilized and the revolution begins. First point I want to make, it is led initially by Francisco Madero, who is a provincial elite, and the issues he's fighting over are home rule, autonomy, a more open political system, democracy, and disbursement of local economic opportunities, things like road building and stuff like that, which the local provincial elites felt locked out on. I also want to mention one other thing going on It's a big word, anarcho-syndicalism. This ideology was being adopted by many industrial urban workers in Mexico, and it's a form of Marxism really did not come into Mexico, but anarcho-syndicalism did. I just realized that. Syndicalism. I left out the IC. It was a form of anarchism uniquely applied to labor. The idea was to create a more cooperative labor-based economy, not unlike Marxist thought. This is going to play an important role in the revolution as well. Now, John Mason Hart divides the actual course of the revolution itself into 3 stages. Stage 1 is elite crisis and mass mobilization, and this occurs from 1910 to 1914. What is it? Well, it's this right here. Yeah, what does that say? It says, local elites challenge the national government, and in the vacuum created by that conflict, that strife, mass movements like Villas and Zapatas thrived. This is stage 1. I'll say it again. Local elites challenge the national government, and in the vacuum created by that strife, mass movements like Villas and Zapatas thrived. Several things happened. First of all, the United States massed troops at the border of Texas. This was one reason that Diaz felt compelled to leave. Francisco Madero is put in charge, but he cannot reconcile the oligarchy, the old power structure, the Porfiristas, and the foreigners to his rule. About this time, violent labor organizing movements spring up in the cities, people adopting anarcho-syndicalism. Huerta, at this point, then overthrows Madero. This is the counterstrike by the oligarchy and the Americans. And then Carranza and Obregón lead the constitutionalist revolution. 1914, Huerta is defeated, and the rebels begin coalescing into 2 distinct groups. The Villistas and the Zapatistas on one side, and the Carranchistas and the Obregonistas on the other. Recall the attempted constitutional convention that Carranza called for at Aguas Calientes, and that's when they began to realize that they had separate aims and began to withdraw and began to fight each other. That's when that happened, and this ends stage 1. All right, stage 2 has 3 elements: class confrontation, American intervention, and workers' defeat. This occurs from 1914 to 1916. And what is it? It's this right here. What that says is the victorious Pequeña Burguesia and the provincial elites under Carranza and Obregón fought, and together with the industrial workers at this point, fought against the peasants under largely Zapata and Villa. Villa's followers were mostly rural workers, and we're not including them in the industrial workers. And the U.S. intervenes on the former's side. So here's what happens. The Americans, as you recall, intervene at Veracruz in April of 1914. And what I didn't mention before was they put an immense stockpile of arms there. I didn't realize how significant it was. Secondly, the United States ships, U.S. ships enter 5 major ports, the 5 most important ports in Mexico, to maintain the flow of supplies to the Constitutionalists. And giant American commercial plantations in southern Mexico are shipped guns from Veracruz so that their private armies can maintain law and order. In by mid-1915, the strategic domination of the domination of Villa and Zapata is achieved. Now, the fighting will go on for a number more years, but basically they've been, from a strategic perspective, neutralized. And also labor, at this point the industrial labor and the Pequeña bourgeoisie turn on each other over industrial labor's plan to implement anarcho-syndicalism, sort of a cooperative economy. It's obviously not going to be good for capitalists. And they actually, the main organization is something called the Casa del Obrero Mundial, or it's just referred to as the Mundial. And they conduct all these strikes to to enact their plans. And under Carranza, troops brutally crush these strikes and the hopes of these workers. All right, stage 3. Elite synthesis and socio-political reorganization. By the way, this occurs from 1916 to 1924. What is this stage? Well, what it is the Pequeña Burguesia backs Obregón and Calles against Carranza, and they destroy him and begin to rebuild Mexican society. And here's what happens. First of all, of course, this happens before Carranza's death, but we've got this Constitution of 1917, and that, though that instrument and the will of the winners, or through that instrument and the will of the winners, the masses really made striking gains, eliminating most of the vestiges of caste and archaic social relations that frankly plague much of Latin America today, opening society for public education and individual mobility. So the importance of that Constitution, although it was not obviously enacted fully immediately, cannot be underestimated. And then next, in the 1920s and 1930s, the government isolated and co-opted violently dissident agrarian, labor, military, business, and church groups. Their revolutionary or dissenting tendencies removed, these defeated groups joined the new hierarchy as subordinate parts. They were sort of co-opted into the PRI, what will become the PRI establishment. In the meantime, the state reached a series of accommodations with American companies and with the American government, as you'll recall. And so what happens, for example, what I'm talking about when I talk about co-opting groups and making them part of the government machinery, I'm talking about, for instance, CROM, that labor group that basically was just a political puppet for Obregón and was much less radical than, say, the Mundialo. I'm talking about the Partido Agrarista, the official agrarian party, which was really just sort of these two, a Labor Party and CROM and a agrarian party, were sort of political puppets, really, of Obregón. And so the defeated groups, really the industrial workers and the agraristas, the campesinos, they are sort of co-opted in. The agrarian reforms and strengthening of government structures during the era of President Cardenas have been portrayed as revolutionary. But in addition to sowing confusion among scholars who talk of continuing revolution, peaceful revolution, industrialized revolution, the most significant role in the development of post-revolutionary Mexico has been successful mechanisms of elite social control over historically restless and revolutionary segments of society. Society is rebuilt, and the elites are still in control. A new set of elites, they just sound revolutionary.